welcome to this episode of Holistic Healing with Lori. And in today's podcast, we're going to be talking about trauma and how it can affect you when you have chronic illness, but also how it contributes to chronic illness and to how you can take care of it, how you can start to address it, right? It's certainly a long-term process. And this is whether we're talking about trauma with a big T or trauma with a little t. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between those two. And I'm actually speaking in the Trauma to Transcendence Summit with Dawson Church and many other highly, highly esteemed speakers. I'm very honored to be a part of that particular summit. And if you're not familiar with Dawson Church, he is absolutely incredible. He actually interviewed me, and it was just such a pleasure to be spending time with him. And I know that you're going to enjoy that interview. So do make sure to check that out. We'll put a link to it. It's free to watch on, I think it's September the 6th is the day of my interview. And otherwise, you'll want to purchase the whole summit. But I think it's pretty inexpensive. And like I said, there are amazing, amazing speakers on there. Let's talk about types of traumas that might be influencing your current chronic illness or chronic symptoms. And also, like I said, about what you can do about that. So I created this handy dandy PDF that you can actually download. I love that picture, y'all. Love it, that graphic. So this is the link between trauma and chronic illness here. And one of my favorite ways to address trauma, whether it's trauma with a little t or trauma with a big T, is using meridian tapping, also called EFT tapping. This is what we use in the Heal Advanced Recovery program, and to a certain degree in the Heal Starter program as well, though we don't go into as much detail there, we don't get as deep there. I do have a free meridian tapping meditation that we're going to be doing in next week's podcast, I think. I don't know, but it's definitely in an upcoming podcast episode. And yeah, so also though, understand that this is we have a whole approach, right? A holistic approach with Lori Rivers Holistic and with the HEAL programs. We also want to make sure that we're taking a look at hidden infections and at detoxification and at your environment, right? Okay, so let's talk about the types of trauma that could be affecting your current state. Big traumas, these can include parental separation or divorce, physical neglect, emotional neglect, witnessing violence, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and you can read the rest of these. And like I said, you can download this. And we also find is that for some people, these are one-off, but for some people, they are continuous throughout childhood or throughout adolescence or throughout adulthood or all of the above, right? And in some ways, that continual trauma, continuing to experience that can be even more difficult than a one-off time of physical abuse or emotional abuse or sexual abuse. Now, those are still big T traumas and definitely can affect your wellness and your health at this point too. But what happens most of the time when people experience this over and over again, especially in childhood, is that it becomes normalized, and that as a child, you develop strategies to be able to survive really emotionally. And so we can tend to, as children, to push down our feelings, to disassociate from our body and our emotions and things like that. And that is very important that as children, we do that in order, again, to survive. because at that point we don't know how to process what's happening to us. But later on in life, it becomes a big hindrance because we want to be able to feel our emotions and to be able to process those things that happened in the past. Also, though, the little t traumas can affect us over time as well, right? And so these can include things like not feeling good enough, low self-esteem, feeling left out or rejected. Anybody back in like grade school or middle school? Oh my gosh, middle school. I can't remember what y'all call it in the UK. But yeah, that feeling left out and rejected, feeling unappreciated, having a lack mentality around finances or time or really anything, financial insecurity, moving, planning a marriage, actually. And what other little t traumas can you think of? And these can build up over time for sure, right? One of the ways that trauma can contribute to chronic illness is that it piles more into our stress bucket. Our stress bucket, when we have more and more and more of these little t traumas or more and more stress building, especially on top of maybe some bigger t traumas, then that stress bucket overflows. And we know, you probably know that after a while, when that stress bucket is overloaded, then the body starts to break down, really. So trauma can lead to a lot of different issues, sleep issues. And when you have sleep issues, your body's not able to repair and restore cells. Also, while we sleep, it's an important time for brain detox. And so if our brain gets toxic, it makes a lot of problems happen in there, right? Also leads to more oxidative stress and systemic inflammation. So it really just keeps perpetuating itself and contributing even more and more to the stress bucket. Yeah. So long-term effects of trauma on the immune system. You might initially be experiencing some fatigue, some sleep issues, being afraid that it's going to happen again. Oh my goodness, that's a huge one, right? PTSD can certainly occur. Anxiety focused on flashbacks, depression, avoidance of emotions, like we were talking about earlier, that's a big one too. And that causes problems in all sorts of ways, right? When we hold those emotions in, we actually store them in our cells. Our cells have something called cellular memory, and holding those emotions in can really cause problems. Now, as we were talking about earlier as well, when those traumatic events and effects, when they happen over long periods, they keep overflowing our stress bucket. And then at some point, the immune system just goes, oh my gosh, I can't handle this anymore. And it can't bounce back anymore. And then that's when we tend to experience some kind of big storm, right? So maybe it's a virus, maybe it's COVID, maybe it's a super stressful event. And that just absolutely pushes our body, our immune system, and our emotional well-being over the edge. So it could be continuous buildup over time, or it's that big storm is what I call it, that happens that just causes everything to collapse because things have been building. Now, I'm not going to get into the imbalance of the Th1 and Th2 right now. I talk about this in a lot of other videos, but like I said, when you download this, there's a lot of good information here. It basically, Th1 is your killer part of your immune system, right? It's the part that fights off viruses and things like that. Th2 is your inflammation. And so what happens over time when your body is stressed out and your immune system gets whacked out is the Th2 takes over and the Th1 becomes very, very low. So you just end up dealing with a lot of inflammation and not very much ability to fight off pathogens and invaders. And this is where things get really funky with toxins and with pathogens in the body. And then we have the amazing cell danger response. Okay, so I'll see if I can talk about this in a shorter amount of time, because we could talk about this for lengthy time. So cell danger response is what happens when our cells experience when they sense danger. Now, this can be from the nervous system, or it can be so it can be a stress response. So are experiencing a lot of stress at work or something like that. Or it can be a pathogen that your immune system notices and senses. But what happens is, so most of us learn that the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cells, right? They create energy for our cells. In a perfect world, that is what they do. But once the cell senses danger, the mitochondria actually go out of the cell, outside of the cell. What? But it is really important because they become signalers to the immune system to start doing its job. So the mitochondria is, hey, immune system, you need to turn on now. We have things that we need to fight. So cell danger response is in and of itself a good thing. It's needed. But what ends up causing problems is when we have these things that we're talking about here, where the immune system is so whacked out that the Th2 is super high and the Th1 is super low. And so all the immune system can do at this point is cause inflammation. And so what happens is there are three phases to the cell danger response, and they're like checkpoints at each point that the body has to get through. And when the immune system is whacked out, when the body has been through all this stress and trauma that it's experienced and is dealing with pathogens and dealing with toxins and has this imbalance, right? This dysbiosis, the cell danger response can't get past those checkpoints. So it gets stuck in either the first part or the second part or the third part. And this is where we see chronic illness, right? Now, when it's working properly, when the body, the immune system is working properly, let's say that there's a pathogen that sets off that cell danger response, then inflammation is a good thing. Then it sends things to that pathogen, but it's also sending the Th1 to kill the pathogen. And so it passes that first checkpoint, and then it passes that second checkpoint. And it's fascinating if you look into what it has to do to pass each checkpoint. I can't remember honestly right now, and it's quite involved. And then it passes that third checkpoint, and the third checkpoint actually has to do with like mending the cell or getting rid of the cells that have been damaged. And then it goes back to its original place where the cell goes, hey, mitochondria, come on back in and start making more energy for us again. You might be able to understand now how when you're super stressed out or when you have a virus or something that you get so fatigued. And there are several other reasons for that as well. But a lot of it does have to do with the fact that the mitochondria are out of the cell. They're still creating a little bit of energy, is my understanding, but not nearly as much as when they're inside the cell, only focusing on creating energy, as opposed to signaling the nervous system or signaling the immune system. Back to our handy dandy download. That is the cell danger response in a nutshell. And we go into the nervous system impact on the cell danger response. Like I mentioned earlier, the nervous system can set off the cell danger response. And we know that the nervous system can get super dysregulated with these chronic illnesses, but also before these chronic illnesses. They can contribute a lot to chronic illnesses. And especially if you grew up with continuous trauma then your nervous system is very likely in fight, flight, freeze, fawn the majority of the time. Because again, that's how you survived, right? Constantly looking for danger, constantly looking for how to keep these bad things from happening again. And when we deal with that as children, we end up carrying that to adulthood. And the nervous system needs to actually be retrained, really. And that is one of the things that we do in the HEAL program. Yeah. Let's summarize what happens here, right? We have whether your chronic symptoms, whether your chronic illness was triggered by trauma or pathogens or toxins or your environment, like some sort of exposure that you had, a toxic exposure, or, and this is what usually happens, is a combination of all of them or many of them, then again, the body gets stuck in this cell danger response. And it's indefinitely. And that's why we got to come in and do stuff, right? We got to come in and stop that cycle. And because being stuck in the cell danger response, this is what causes the chronic inflammation and chronic illnesses and diseases like long COVID, ME/CFS, fibromyalgia, MS, IBS, MCAS, you name it, that's what's happening here. So it can contribute, trauma can contribute to weakened immunity, which in turn means that these hidden infections and pathogens can really take hold and take over in there. We've got systemic inflammation. We've got mitochondrial dysfunction. The mitochondria are not able to make energy properly in the body. And we've got nervous system dysfunction. And all of this also makes it very difficult emotionally, right? So essentially, what it boils down to is that trauma increases susceptibility to chronic disease and keeps it going. So we really need to heal our trauma. And now that's a very simplistic statement. Oh my goodness. Please know that I am not in any way minimizing that. That's a big task. It's also super rewarding. It's one of the most rewarding things that you will ever do for yourself. So even aside from these chronic illnesses and how the trauma contributes to them, is also your emotional, mental being and how much you're able to bounce back from things when you experience them in your life, and how much you're able to give to your family, to your friends, and first and foremost to yourself. Yeah. So we want to make sure, as always, that we're taking a look at this full picture, that we're taking a look at healing trauma, at dealing with current emotions and learning how to become friends with them, and shifting our beliefs. And at the same time that we're also, again, addressing these hidden infections, that we're reducing the toxic load on our bodies and what's already toxic in our bodies, which if you have a chronic infection, if you have a chronic illness or chronic symptoms, your body is absolutely going to be holding a ton of toxins. We want to be addressing your organ function, especially liver and gallbladder. And we also want to be looking at your environment. What is your environment like? And a lot of times, things that are causing problems in your environment they're usually hidden, right? So I'll just a little blurb here. We just found out that we have toxic levels of mold in our house. And we had checked that many years ago and it was fine, but something happened in the meantime. And that's been causing problems, health problems for both of us. Very excited that we get to deal with that. And in terms of trauma, as far as that's concerned, it could be a very traumatic event. But because I've personally done a schnikey ton of work on past trauma, and I did do some tapping, a lot of EFT tapping on it. And so rather than it being a traumatic event, would I choose it? No. But it has become more of an interesting and exciting, actually, adventure for us to do the remediation and explore the options that we have, and actually to use the things that I've been recommending to my clients and my students for a while now. So we get to have our own experience of it. So I hope that is helpful for you. Make sure that you download that PDF there, and please do join us for the summit. I would love to hear from you about that interview if you enjoyed it. And please share this. Actually, I really think that this is important for everybody, because even if you think that you haven't had traumatic events, even if you don't connect with that word, it's still very worth looking at the significantly difficult events in your life and dealing with those, working through them, and allowing that space for resilience, allowing that space for healing from chronic illness and chronic conditions. And it's just going to make your life so much better. All right, lots of love, and I will see you in the next episode of Holistic Healing with Lori.